Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Navigating the Digital Landscape, part of the 2021 Alumni Webinar Series. Before we get started, I want to turn things over briefly to Shannon Tim from the Wisconsin School of Business. Shannon?
Thanks, Jeremiah. My name is Shannon Tim, and I'm the Director of Alumni Relations for the Wisconsin School of Business. It is great to be with everyone for the webinar today. I'm really looking forward to today's topic, and I want to thank Professor Bauer for being here to lead this conversation. Before we get started, I want to share some other things that you might be interested in. We can go to the next slide. We are finalizing our next round of webinars, and we will be releasing that schedule later this summer. But in the meantime, we have a great library that we've built up of past webinars that are available on demand if you are interested in any of the other topics that we've covered. The ones that you're seeing on your screen right now are just the most recent, but we have over a dozen to choose from. And I know that that link listed there is pretty long, but if you go to the School of Business's website and find the alumni section, you will find all of the recordings there, and we'll also make sure to put this link in our follow-up email for this webinar. Also, if there's a topic that you'd like to see, always feel free to email us and let us know. Our email address is alumni@wsb.wisc.edu, and I'll say that one more time, alumni@wsb.wisc.edu. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jeremiah to get us started.
Thank you, Shannon. Today's webinar is also brought to you by the Wisconsin School of Business Center for Professional and Executive Development. We partner with individuals and organizations to enhance performance and productivity through professional development programs, certificates, coaching, consulting, and assessments. Professional development programs are delivered on-site here in Madison, and we are now offering online programs, all facilitated by instructors with practical real-world experience. The Center for Professional and Executive Development also partners with organizations throughout the country to provide customized on-site and online professional development programs, coaching, and consulting. For more information on the Center for Professional and Executive Development, please visit our website at uwcped.org. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask during today's webinar, you can submit the questions using the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. And you can expand or collapse the control panel using the orange arrow. We'll post questions that are submitted during a Q&A period at the end of today's webinar. And I also want to mention that today's webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you within the next few days. So now I'd like to introduce today's facilitator, Daniel Bauer. Danny is a professor and the Hickman Larson Chair in Actuarial Science at the Wisconsin School of Business. He is one of the architects of our Master's in Business Analytics, for which he is currently serves as the faculty director. Danny grew up in Southern Germany and received his PhD in applied mathematics and a master's in statistics, and he held faculty positions at several other U.S. business schools before joining the UW. He has published his research in leading journals, statistics, economics, finance, and management, and he teaches classes in actuarial science, quantitative finance, and data analytics. Danny, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll pass it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Jeremiah. Can you hear me okay? All right, not hearing anything to the contrary. So thank you very much. As Jeremiah kindly introduced, I'm a professor in the business school. And this picture was taken in the pre-COVID time where haircuts were a little less scarce of a commodity. So I'm going to talk to you about navigating the digital landscape, right? And the question is, well, why am I talking to you about this? And Jeremiah sort of indicated a little bit why I have a background in mathematics and statistics. I've been teaching this in business schools since quite a while, and at my previous institution, as well as the Wisconsin School of Business, I've been a part in a team that created our Masters of Business Analytics. We're very proud that we now have approximately 100 students starting in 2021. And I'm also currently serving as a faculty director. And in the context of this program, I teach the machine learning class and as well as the statistics and programming bootcamp. So I think about these things around digital transformation and analytics and so on quite a bit. I've also, and this relates to also what Jeremiah had said, I've been engaged a little bit on teaching professional courses on digital transformation together with colleagues at the Wisconsin School of Business. Above all, our Dean Samba, Vallabh Sambarmurthy, who is an international renowned expert for digital transformation. And my typical partner in crime when doing these trainings is my colleague Justin Sidnor. And I'm flagging that because I'm borrowing very heavily on our joint material. So I should give some attribution to that. So that maybe explains a little bit of why Jeremiah asked me to deliver this seminar. But why did Jeremiah and why did his colleagues at CPED and why did Shannon and the alumni relations folks at the Wisconsin School of Business think this would be an interesting and worthy seminar? Well, one way of getting at this is to simply look at the 5 most valuable US companies right now. So in 2021, I pulled this a couple of weeks ago and compare this to the 5 most valuable companies in 1995, so about 25 years ago, right? And while you can see that the companies that were most valuable in 1995, General Electric, ExxonMobil, AT&T, Coca-Cola, and Walmart, are sort of well-known household names, the list is very different than it looks today. In particular, right, the list of the most valuable companies today, right, is led by Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, so the Google parent company, Facebook, and so on. So what's interesting is that if you go further down that list, right, the only company that's in the top 5 in 2021 that was in the top 10 in 1995 was Microsoft at number 10. Right? And Walmart, which was the top 5 company in 1995, and today is the 12th most valuable company. They're still high up, but there are other companies such as Tesla or Nvidia, and probably most of you don't know Nvidia except if you're sort of like computer games. They're sort of famous for developing graphics cards, is valued at more than Walmart. So why is that? How to explain this sudden shift, or maybe not sudden shift, but this shift in most valuable companies between 25 years ago and now? Well, one way of answering this is to sort of think about digital transformation, and this is what this seminar is about, right? So one way of answering this is that the economy has become increasingly more digital, right? And the top 5 companies, Microsoft, Apple, Google, and so on, are digital giants. So in particular, it appears that access to and ownership of data and the ability of harnessing data as a resource appear to present key competitive advantages that seem to be valued by market participants, right? We use market capitalization, so this is sort of some information on how the market views these companies, right? And this is probably also factoring in to some extent to the human talent they can attract, right? So if you have a relative or a friend that started working for Google, right, the typical reaction is, wow, that people are impressed, right? So these companies not only have sort of leadership in terms of their market capitalization, but they also seem to be attracting a lot of high-profile talent. So in saying this, well, these are maybe potential answers, but it's not 100% concrete, right? So in particular, we want to start this off with a little poll. So if you listen to those answers and those made sense to you, were you able to really understand what digital means? Would you be able to explain it to somebody else? And we have this scale here, and John is going to launch a poll for us here in a second. So we're going to ask you to sort of opine on whether you have a good sense of what digital means in this context, right? Where A would mean maybe not really. D's on the other end of the spectrum. Well, I could really explain it well. Whereas B and C, well, I have some sense of it in the middle. So we're really interested in your responses there. So just maybe click on the poll that should be appearing on your screen. And John, once you feel like we have a little bit of a quorum, please share the results. So, all right, so there's not many A's, there's no D's, and there seem to be a good number of B's and C's, right? Where there's maybe some vague sense, but maybe not a terribly concrete sense. Here, John is sharing the results, right? So A about 5% and B, C at equal proportions 48, but nobody says that they could explain it well to others. And well, that's convenient, because if everybody had answered D, that wouldn't be great from my perspective, because then most of my slides that are following wouldn't be terribly interesting to the crowd. So this is sort of as expected and hopefully good, right? So what we're going to try to do here, and John, yeah, is clicking this away. What we're going to try to do here is maybe provide a little bit of more concrete sense, what digital means, how it relates to artificial intelligence, to analytics and all that, and how to really sort of like think about this and maybe provide a concrete decision. And in particular, we're going to dive into a little bit into how data is used, why maybe market participants are valuing this access and ownership of data. And if you think back to the 5 most valuable companies, and also highlight a little bit what are potential limitations and challenges. And then we're going to end this presentation by talking a little bit about what important skills might be going forward in this new ecosystem, on what you could do to sort of like, to succeed in this environment. All right. So what do we mean by digital? So, and I should start with a disclaimer here. When we started having these discussions a couple of years ago, I was not a big fan of this tagline digital, right? Because, it has a concrete meaning, it means digits, and so on, right? And I, as us professors do, right? Sort of like, like very know-it-all way, I pointed out that some of the most advanced quantum computing techniques are actually not digital, but analog in nature, even though that's not 100% relevant, right? But I sort of came around on the use of digital. I still don't like the word digital, but I find it very useful to have sort of a catch-all phrase that describes certain aspects that have, or certain developments that have taken place over the last 20 years or so, that are leading us to a different place that we have been. And maybe one way of thinking about this is to think about a very innocent example, right? Think about, a bonfire 30 years ago that you went to, and where somebody brought out the guitar and sang a bonfire song and so on, right? Some 30 years ago, probably there was no data, there was no permanent record of that bonfire, right? It might exist in your memories, maybe positive or negative, right? But there was not really anything that emanated and that was on permanent record, right? If you imagine a bonfire today, right? Sort of like same situations, right? Before the bonfire, people might talk about it in social media. Hey, we're going to have a bonfire at Picnic Point tonight, right? Or and people might be talking about it on chat, right? Might be text messaging. Hey, I'm going to be there at 8 tonight, right? Then once people go to the bonfire, right, everybody's going to carry one of those with them, right? So you're going to have an accumulation of people that is recorded by some geographic location devices. So suddenly you have a lot of people sort of sitting around a bonfire and being in a very concrete situation. And when in the end, when somebody cranked and brought out the guitar, right, maybe somebody took a video of that, put it on social media and so on, right? So this is to say that in this sort of like, new world where we're carrying our phones everywhere, we're communicating over social media and so on, right? There's sort of a record keeping of everything, right? There's going to be a permanent record of that bonfire, and all of this is digital information, right? There's video, there's text information, there's location information that is going to be stored somewhere in the cloud, right? And now you can say that I'm not really comfortable with that. So this is not a value judgment, this is good or bad, right? But the fact of the matter is that this interaction, while maybe 20 years ago, not having created much data, these days, will create a digital footprint, right? Now, at the same time that we are creating more and more data through the Internet of Things, through devices and so on, there's been a massive increase in computing technology, right? So some of you might be familiar with Moore's law, which talks about computing capabilities and sort of increasing over time. And with computing capabilities, the field of statistics, predictive statistics in particular, has been revolutionized, right? So not only do we have more data, but we also have become better at using it and using it to make certain predictions. So how might company use the information that you're at a bonfire? If a company has the available information that you were at a bonfire, maybe the next day they're gonna send you an advertisement for marshmallows and chocolate and for s'more ingredients, right? Maybe Amazon is gonna put a book that gives bonfire songs high on your priority list next time you log into your Amazon account. And maybe somebody has a good idea for an app that you could use at bonfires, maybe to share bonfires across continents, to have a joint bonfire, or maybe coming up with different bonfire songs or bonfire activities, right? Now, maybe we've taken this example as long as it should be taken, right? The point is that even sort of like this relatively innocent situation, right, will create data, right? The data can be used by companies, and in turn is going to create maybe new digital technology, maybe a new app that in turn is going to generate more data, which then can be used, right? So you have sort of this cyclical relationship, right, where this increased availability of data is going to lead to new opportunity to be harnessed by companies, et cetera, to provide new products, et cetera, right? And so why I said that why I came around on the term digital, that I find digital is a helpful word, maybe not an ideal word, to describe this. So by digital transformation, what we mean is this broad consequence of these mutually connected, rapid advances in data availability and technology. Now, how has this changed business? Well, digital technology is pervasive, right? And while maybe sometime back, right, it was mostly about the product, right? Today, a lot of it is also about the digital experience, right? So one key example that comes to mind here is maybe Starbucks, right? Whether Starbucks has the best coffee or not, right? That's for people to decide, right? But they have become very successful in creating a customer experience where you can order a coffee to your liking, pick it up. Maybe you don't even have to pay for it because it's already paid via your app, right? So maybe you can do this even without interacting with a person, pick it up in a drive-through, right? So that has provided new services and probably has contributed to the rise of Starbucks. Furthermore, by having available all this digital information, right, allows companies to be a lot more efficient and automate a good amount of their activities, right? So for example, if you think about shipping companies, having detailed information about the geometry of the items that are shipped, right, might allow them to more efficiently load their containers or load their trucks, as is indicated below, right? By being able to pick up on information and documents and so on, right? Maybe you can provide recommendations. Furthermore, of course, us carrying around all these devices all the time also has allowed for digital product and service innovations, right? So think about Uber and Lyft. So when we're talking about data and these companies harnessing and using data, right, this is sort of intricately related to machine learning and artificial intelligence. So maybe let's go with a second poll here, right? And let me ask you whether you are familiar and comfortable with the terms machine learning and artificial intelligence. And as in our first survey, right, we have sort of like a range here. A means I'm not really familiar, B and C is sort of in the middle, and D is, well, I'm really an expert. All right, so it looks like the answer is slightly stabilizing. All right, John, whenever you feel like we have a quorum, maybe share the results. All right, here we go. So there's a few A's and very little background. There's a few D's that you could explain as well to others, but a lot of B's and C's, right? That you have some sense, but there might be some lack. And that's good. If all of you were data scientists and had answered D, then again, the remainder of my slides wouldn't be very informative to you. So for those of you who answered D, please bear with me. Maybe this is a nice repetition, but I hope for the ones in the A and B and C buckets to maybe provide a broad perspective of the workings of artificial intelligence and machine learning. All right, thank you, John. Right, so with that in mind, right, let's try to define some terms. And I, for one, and this is sort of like very subjective insights, you know, maybe computer scientists have a different perspective here, but I do not believe that computers are any more intelligent today than they have been, right? So in particular, when, you know, like artificial intelligence started like in the 70s, 60s, right, they were sort of these large goals, right, of machines doing logic, deductive reasoning, and so on. And at least to my knowledge or to my background, right, there hasn't been tremendous advancements in terms of computers carrying out tasks that require judgment or deductive reasoning. However, what computers have become really good at doing is impostering, right? Is mimicking this, and this is sort of like in this more narrow area of machine learning, right? So while artificial intelligence is sort of like this broad, larger set of contexts, right? Machine learning is rather concrete and refers to a branch of artificial intelligence that is focused on methods of creating computer algorithms that automatically improve through exposure to data and experience, right? And the key point to emphasize here is through the exposure to data and experience, right? So rather than engaging in logic and deductive reasoning, what machine learning is good at is mimicking patterns, right? Picking up on patterns that are available in existing data. And even further narrowly down, one particular area of machine learning, so-called deep learning, right? If you have deep learning, this is just one particular machine learning technology that uses something that is called deep neural nets or multi-layered neural nets for forging predictions. And we'll talk about this a little bit, but there are sort of 2 points worth highlighting here. Number one, when people came up with the first deep neural network models, it's sort of like in the 70s, 80s, they mimicked or they tried to model functions of the human brain, right? So one of the interesting thing here is that these prediction models, which are nothing else than mathematical equation, you know, at a high level, try to build or rebuild patterns that are in the human brain. And, you know, the language talking about these types of model reflects that, where you have neurons and synapses and so on, and really they're just special kinds of mathematical equations. The other point to highlight here is that we don't really have a very good understanding, computer scientists don't really have a very good understanding of why these deep learning prediction models work so well, right? It's sort of like the proof is in the pudding, right? They're applied to various prediction models and they just perform really well. This is sort of highlighted by this article that I put down here in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the unreasonable effectiveness of deep learning and artificial intelligence, right? So it works really, really well, We don't really understand why, but that's good enough for many applications, right? And as a consequence, right, deep learning has sort of like made these great achievements every year, in the areas of text mining, voice recognition, computer vision, and etc. Right? But why is this important? Well, and machine learning can do something that traditional computer programming cannot do, right? So for all of you who've taken maybe a computer programming class, right, typically what you do with a computer program is that you have certain inputs, right? So maybe input is a number, and then the program spits out a certain output, right? For example, if the input is 2, it will tell you it's an even number. If it's 3, it's an odd number, right? And that's great for simple routine tasks, right? However, if you ask computer scientists to sit down and tell them to write a computer program for a self-driving cars, they will fail miserably. And the reason is not that each single decision that a driver does is utterly complex. It's because there's so many eventualities. There's so many things that can happen, right? There's so many, a bear could come from the right, a cow could come from the left, right? And suddenly you might have a hailstorm, right? There's just so many eventualities that sort of thinking through all of these eventualities for computer programming, for a computer programmer, is an impossible task. However, most of us are fairly comfortable driving. So even though this is sort of this really complex task, right, we're pretty comfortable doing it, right? We typically are able to carry on a conversation while we're doing it, right? We can listen to the radio. Some of us are on the cell phone while we're driving. We shouldn't be, right? But I mean, so this is while this is a really complex task, right? Most of us have gotten good at it. How did we become good at it? Well, through experience and repetition. Right? We started, either in driver's ed or with our parents in the back seat or the passenger seat yelling at us when we ought to brake, right? So there was immediate feedback, right, that taught us how to drive. And it's sort of like this, what this picture is seeking to illustrate here, right? So it's something that you did over and over and over and over again, right? And you got immediate feedback, and maybe you got in a crash or two when you're 19 or 20, right? Maybe a fender bender, and like you got the feedback that that's pretty bad, right? But eventually you were able to pick it up. And I think that's a really good analogy. That's exactly what machine learning has become good at, right? So while traditional programs, right, have this input-output relationship, what machine learning does is not take inputs and outputs, but rather look at existing data, right? And so computer scientists and statisticians have figured out how computers can learn algorithms in complex tasks, such as driving, by exposing them to a lot of data, right? So how does this data look like? Well, imagine if you think back to the self-driving car example, right? You just ask, a bunch of people to go out, drive in, rural Wisconsin, in the Arizona desert, and they're driving a car, and on the car, you just put a lot of sensors. You put cameras to the side, to the front, you put thermometers, you put maybe a noise sensor, right, a microphone, all sorts of sensors, and people are driving around. There's the sensorial information, and based on the sensorial information, right, people are then making certain actions, right? They veer right, they veer left, they hit on the brake, right? So all of this, you can sort of think about input-output relationships, right? There's sensorial information, and based on this sensorial information, the self-driving car can learn to do certain things by impostering drivers that they observe, right? And data is relatively cheap there because you can send out people to drive to the desert if you have the capability of hiring these people, right? Importantly, this is one point that I'm going to come back to later. A self-driving car will not brake for an animal in the street because they fundamentally think it's the right thing to do when the computer made a judgment call that they should be braking for animals, because if they don't brake for animals, then society unravels. The reason that a computer brakes for an animal is that all the data that they've been trained on for drivers, they have observed people braking for animals, right? And that's sort of like something that's important to keep in the back of my mind. And I'm going to come back to that a couple of times through this through this talk, right? So the important point here is that because of machine learning, right, computers can increasingly do a range of complex tasks that are used to be nearly impossible to program, right? Think about the self-driving car example, right? And in fact, they're moving into tasks that are more cognitive and not just manual labor, right? So they can take over some of the tasks that historically have been taken over by humans, right? One key point to emphasize here, right? And this is sort of like to think about the use cases of machine learning, right? Is that data is a key ingredient, right? So computers haven't gotten better at logical reasoning, but they have become good at picking up patterns in data, right? So what you need here are example cases where you have an outcome and characteristics of situations that are important for generating that outcome, right? So in the self-driving car example, right, the outcome would be veering right, veering left, exerting a certain force on the brake, and the characteristics that predict that outcome or that should predict that outcome is all the sensorial information, right? So, and this is exactly where we sort of connect to these companies, right? One reason, arguably, why the marketplace, in terms of market capitalization, values this availability and access to data, right, is because this data allows computers to predict a lot of things, right? Netflix has tons of information about viewers' viewing history, as well as which kind of series in the end they stuck with, right? So they will be able, by looking in the past, well, this person has a similar viewing history as you do, so I'm going to recommend that series to you because other people have liked that series. Similar, Amazon, right? They have information on people that have a similar reading or purchasing pattern as you, and thereby is able to recommend certain projects to you. Right? If you think about speech recognition, right? Siri or other speech recognition systems, right? They have a lot of exposure data, right? And then people correct them in the chat when they got it wrong, right? So not only do they have the corrected data afterwards, and thereby are able to improve over and over. However, and this is sort of like a little bit of a dark side here, right? That also allows companies to take influence, right? And if you have, there's a variety of Netflix documentary that I'm sure several of you have watched, right? So this is not all great, but it's to some extent a situation that we're in, right? So this is one thing that I want to flag, right? There are limitations, challenges, and even perils associated with this, right? So what I'm saying is that, to some extent, this increased availability of data and companies taking advantage of this data is a reality, whether we like it or not, right? But we should be able to, number one, protect ourselves to the extent we want to do that, and also be aware of sort of the societal harms. And so maybe the three things I want to bring up, and the slide should probably be 20 slides, and there should probably be a separate seminar on just the challenges and perils going along with the increased use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. But some aspects in which machine learning models fail is that they're not able to distinguish between correlation and causation. That's one thing, and maybe you've heard that. And the other thing is that, given that this is a little bit opaque and that, general understanding is sort of limited, there's a lot of companies out there that promise they can do X, Y, Z with machine learning when really, it's not possible, right? So here, Arvind Naranyan from Princeton has this set of company examples of AI snake oil that he frequently refers to, right? But maybe most importantly, right, by the increased usage of AI for all sorts of decisions, right, we're sort of like opening us up for existing biases in the data and algorithmic biases. And one very loud voice in this context is that of Cathy O'Neil, who's been, author of the book Weapons of Mass Destruction. I just want to point this out here. We don't have the time in this in the seminar to really dive into this, but it's an important it's an important subject nonetheless. All right, so to summarize maybe where we stand right now, right? What I try to get across is, number one, to have some sense of what we mean by digital transformation, right? This confluence of data, technology, and the use of data, right? I wanted to provide some, high-level overview of machine learning and AI and how it works, right? So, predictive algorithms, you need existing data, etc. Right? I want to spend the last maybe 10, 15 minutes of this presentations before we go to Q&A to talk a little bit about the implications for people who are in the midst of their career, who maybe are embarking on a career, or if you're in a position where you have a team and you're managing teams, right? You feel responsibility for your workers, right? So what does that mean for you? And one helpful article that we like to talk about here is this article by Carl Fry and Michael Osborne, who two research from Oxford University in Britain, right? And so they have published this paper, "The Future of Employment: How Susceptible Are Jobs to Computerization?" And in this article, what Drs. Fry and Osborne do is they look at a number of jobs. They try to define them based on their activities, certain characteristics or features that define those jobs. And they're using machine learning, right? They're using predictive algorithms in order to predict how likely they believe different jobs are to be computerized in the future, right? So they're using sort of like, machine learning in order to figure out how susceptible certain jobs are to be taken over by machine learning algorithms in the future, right? And the reason we like to talk about this algorithm, and we'd like to talk about this paper, and is twofold, right? Number one, right? It is of direct relevance to some people that have certain careers, but it also is helpful to think through how they arrived at the conclusions to showcase the limitations of machine learning to some extent. So what the key outcome of this paper by Fry and Osborne is this listing of different jobs and their likelihood to be computerized, right? And you can see they found that some jobs are very unlikely to be computerized, right? So here, for example, recreational therapists, apparently they believe have a very low likelihood of being computerized. However, we see that some other jobs, right? Title examiner, telemarketer, clerks, order fillers, are more likely to be computerized, right? And if you look at that chart on the right-hand side here, right, you can see that a lot of these jobs with a high probability of computerization, according to these gentlemen, are sort of in the area of sales, right? This is sort of like this darker red color, service, and maybe office and administrative work. Right, so what these researchers are believing or are positing is that a lot of these jobs in services, sales, and support are likely to be computerized. Now, with sort of in mind of the discussion we had earlier about machine learning, right, and how machine learning works. Let's have a little bit of a chat discussion to make this a little interactive. So this analysis was clearly done based on stylized patterns of jobs, right? They define certain features of jobs as they have been historically conceived, right? And this is idolized here, right? So what aspects of services, sales, and support jobs do you think this analysis is focused on, of why they're believing that these tasks could be taken over by computers? And are there aspects of service, sales, and support jobs where, with sort of this backdrop, where maybe computers may not play a large role in the future. So I invite you to just, if you have any ideas, no wrong answers here. I invite everybody to put them in the chat box here. So far I see nothing. Anybody? It's also totally fine to share your reaction maybe to this article by Frey and Osborne that maybe sales jobs and service jobs might be computerized. Do you believe that? Do you not believe that? All right, so great. So we have sort of some and John Wilson, thank you very much, provided an answer here, which I think is very nice, right? He says that probably and that's I believe that's an answer to the first question, right? What aspects of sales and services, sales and support jobs might be easily computerized? And John says, well, they all have some elements in their jobs that are repetitive and common tasks, right? But Jill sort of chimes in and says, well, that she's worked in sales and services, and maybe part of it can be digitally done, right? But there are certain interactions that people like, right? And so Dana says maybe the phone call aspect, right? And here Andrew brings up personal trust and advice, which I think is a really important point. I thank you. Those are very good. Those are very good. And then here, Shauna, relationship building, persuading, professional advice. That's exactly right. And this is sort of where I wanted to go from this, right? So inherently, a lot of these jobs are multifaceted, right? And I think this is sort of where Jill and Sean are going, right? And probably parts, right, are easily being able to take over by computers, right? Namely everything, and this is exactly in line with what let me see my cursor here, what John had said, right? So things that are repetitive and commonly think, right, those probably will be computerized. However, and this is exactly what I said earlier, right, computers have not gotten better at anything that requires judgment, at anything that requires sort of like, like thinking about it, sort of thinking through a unique situation, right? So anything where you think, hey, oh, that's a tricky one. Well, I haven't seen that one before. I got to think through that. Critical thinking. These are elements of jobs, right, that are certainly present in service, sales, and support jobs, right, that are very unlikely to be computerized, right? So the important point to drive home there, at least from our perspective, is that computers, right, because they rely, think about the self-driving cars, on this large set of data and existing patterns, are not very well suited to deal with unique situations. They need this exposure to the training data and John makes this nice connection to the pandemic. We'll get back to that in a second. Maybe drive home the thought, right? So computers are not very good to learn to deal with these unique situations, right? And this is sort of like, I think, where I want to land, at least before we go to Q&A, right? So maybe to sort of like go back, right? So there's certainly this tendencies, if you think about the companies that were very valuable or considered very valuable at a marketplace 25 years ago relative to now, there's certainly something seems to be changing, and it seems to be having something to do with digital, right? This availability of data, access to data, ownership of data, and the ability to process it, right? And sort of one point here is that computers can take over increasingly complex tasks, and that's something to be mindful. However, and like in sort of like providing advice, right? One of the areas that computers certainly are not good at, and to my knowledge haven't become better, is sort of like exerting judgment, right? So if you think what elements of your job you want to emphasize, which things sort of to focus in on, right? All the tasks that require judgment and critical thinking, I do not believe are anywhere soon to be taken over by computers, right? So I sort of want to close by with maybe that, with that message, right? That yes, the digital landscape is making things a little more challenging, but there's also still a lot of opportunities. And it's not really human versus machine. It's sort of like machine plus human, and there's certainly a lot of opportunities to be levered by using digital technologies. All right. So John had this question in the chat. So maybe let's get to that real quick. What do you think we have learned during the pandemic relative to virtual collaboration that will accelerate these trends? I mean, so I think that's an interesting question from a number of perspectives, right? One point worth making here is sort of like, going back to that bonfire example, while maybe a lot of interactions didn't, create a digital footprint, now a lot of these virtual collaboration interactions, et cetera, have created, virtual footprints. And, so far I don't think have made, much advances in sort of like, like using those, but, I've seen sort of like companies using more and more information about types of Zoom meetings that people schedule in order to have more efficient meetings and so on. So I think that that this is another element of where these virtual interactions I think create more data, and that data I think is going to find its influence somehow, and thereby I think are going to accelerate these trends. John, was that what you were thinking about? So maybe if you want to chime in here and unmute yourself for a second. I don't know if that's technologically possible. I don't know if John is trying.
Yeah, we might have a limit on there, Danny, with the ability to unmute.
All right, okay, but I think that's a really good point. I don't have a very insightful answer here, but I think that's definitely a good point that I think this increased like virtual engagement even in business meetings that maybe before we sat in a meeting room will accelerate these trends to some extent. And good point. Are there other questions, comments? Here, we have a few more here. All right. All right, John, exactly, that's what he was asking about. Thank you. Sorry for asking you to mute yourself when you didn't have the possibility for doing so. And Brian is asking, have you seen any recent trends in overall employment labor trends, such as industries more heavily impacted by the opportunities presented by AI and machine learning? So I think that, and that's why I like to bring up this article by Fry and Osborne. I think so. Just to provide maybe a little more background on this, right? So what I said is they used a machine learning method for predicting which jobs are susceptible to computerization, right? In doing so, right, and this is sort of the analogy to the self-driving car example, they needed data, right? So essentially, you can think about, they have like these 700 jobs. So what they did is they took about 200 jobs that they trained the algorithm on. I don't remember if it was 200. I don't remember the number. So they had a number of jobs that they trained the algorithm on, right? And then they used this trained algorithm to forge predictions for the ones that were not in their training set, right? So to that extent, I think these general conclusions by Fry and Osborne, right? So that we saw on this previous slide, namely that a lot of where you see this is sort of in service, sales, etc. I think that there's certainly truth to that, right? The point I wanted to make is not that that's not true that these industries are more susceptible to computerization, but that jobs are multifaceted, right? And there's probably elements of those jobs which are probably poised to be taken over by AI and machine learning, but not all the elements of the job. You know, so like allowing people to emphasize the elements of their jobs that, you know, humans are good at and machines are not good at, right, could sort of like lead to better outcomes. And this is not an original idea. If you're interested in this, there's a very interesting article, I think that was in Harvard Business Review by a scholar called Ajay Agarwal that makes exactly that point, right? So this is not an original point that I came up with. So if you're interested in that, and Brian, I will feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy to refer you to that article. All right, so Lisa is asking a very interesting question. What is my perspective on the impact of regulations becoming more restrictive on data mining personal information? And you know, so now you got to be careful because, you know, I'm here on behalf of CPAD and the University of Wisconsin, and my subjective answer, this is you know, Danny Bauer talking, and not the institution. I think this is maybe one of the biggest challenges in you know, in business, certainly in machine learning and analytics, but maybe more broadly so, is how to grapple with this, right? I mean, so we know that there's a lot of these dangerous tendencies by the unrestricted use, right? Think back to, I don't know if you're familiar with these example of Cambridge Analytica influencing elections, and you know, people are, you know, like dissuaded, persuaded in different ways by relying on social media data. I think that we ought to do something about it, but you know, like how to regulate it and you know, how much to interfere there is a really difficult task, right? So where do we start? And there's a lot of interesting research going on in this area, and you know, I'm trying to be part of that to some extent. But so my perspective is that it's necessary and something that's going to keep us busy. But I think that we're at the very start of this, right? So I don't know if you know, some of these documentaries that, you know, there's one recent one in Netflix called Coded Bias, and you know, some of the people, like, I remember that because I watched it the other week, and you know, they describe what's going on with regards to and personal information and ownership of personal information as being the wild west, right? That there's very limited scope and how to think about it yet. So I'm, you know, like I to some extent agree with that perspective. Lisa, is that, do you share that? Maybe you can put something in the chat.
And Danny, while Lisa's commenting, Andrew had the question: what specific skills do you see most important for business leaders to pursue to be marketable and succeed in the digitally transformed environment?
So again, that's a very good question, and to some extent, right, I try to address it, right? So I think it's sort of like, I think it's sort of twofold, right? On the one hand, I believe it's important to, as a leader, to get good at spotting opportunities for the deployment of AI and ML solutions, right? This doesn't mean that, you know, like there's a need, I think, for many leaders to be intricately familiar with, you know, how these models work, you know, at the very basic, but sort of like to get a high level understanding. And to some extent, I think that's what we're trying to do at CPAD with these digital leadership courses, and maybe Jeremiah can talk to that a little bit, is to provide not so much a technical overview, but more of an overview of, you know, what is AI good at? You know, where does it fail, right? And sort of like to provide, to obtain sort of like a good sense of where to deploy what kind of technology. I think that's really important, right? And the second aspect, and this is sort of like what I was going to towards the end of this presentation here, is that, you know, to the extent that a business leader has responsibility for employees, for their teams, right? So like, you know, protecting them and, you know, making them most efficient, and sort of thinking about, you know, where they provide the most value, right? And sort of like really thinking through, okay, what aspects here are maybe going to be automated, and where is experience and sort of like this unique skill set of my employees, of my teams, particularly relevant. So I think, future people and that are leaders and leading teams, right, I think need to be, in my opinion, relatively good at sort of spotting these opportunities, both for increasing efficiency, but also how to best employ existing human talent.
Thank you, Danny. We have time for about one more question, and I was wondering, digital transformation is something that a lot of leaders, a lot of individuals are wanting to learn more about. Do you have any book recommendations for attendees where they might be able to get started in that learning journey?
Yeah, so I think that if you are if you're sort of like, if you don't shy away from getting your hands dirty and sort of like trying to understand really from the bottom up how these algorithms work, there is a book by that that by now is very popular in the community, written by a couple of professors, two of them from Stanford, and that that book is called Introduction to Statistical Learning. So and it typically goes under this abbreviation ISLR. So if you open up your browser, you go to Google and you put in ISLR, it's going to immediately come up. And the nice thing about this book, and why I'm recommending this, while there's many out there, is number one, it's free. So the PDF is downloadable by everybody out there, right? So it is a Springer book, so you see my German is Springer rather than Springer. So you can purchase the book on Amazon if you want to, but you can just access the PDF online free of charge. And secondly, what they're doing a really good job at least from my perspective, is that they're providing tutorials in the program language R and a variety of free data sets and clean data sets that allow you to build machine learning algorithms, with a couple of weeks training, right? So what's really nice about this book is not only that it, that it gets at most of the ideas without requirement of taking 5 math classes, right? It's written at a relatively low level, but it also sort of like, gives you some hand-on skills that are relatively easy to address if you're serious about it, right? You're learning statistics, right? So it's not, it's probably not as enjoyable as watching a show on the couch while enjoying a cold beverage, but at the same time, in my opinion, it's highly accessible.
Great. Thank you so much, Danny. And thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate having you on. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Later this week, you'll receive a link to a survey where you'll be able to provide feedback on today's webinar. If you are interested in receiving more information about CPED's programs, please let us know via the survey. We'll also provide a link to view a recording of today's webinar. For more information about the alumni services provided by the Wisconsin School of Business, or to sign up for future alumni webinars, please visit us online at wsb.wisc.edu/alumni. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.